Hi, I'm Amy McKnight, Mac mentor and founder of the Mac Spa. I have been using and supporting Apple products and helping people with their technology needs for over 20 years. And one of the other things I really enjoy and look forward to after a long day of busting my brain at work is happy hour. So, in this new video series, I'll be interviewing my friends and colleagues over happy hour while we're discussing a tech topic. So, I hope you'll have a drink with us and enjoy the show, and maybe you'll even learn something new.
My guest today is artist Eric Matelski, who also happens to be my husband. And today,
That's news to me.
and today we're going to talk about your artwork. And the topic we picked out is basically how you have evolved as an artist, utilizing both your tangible skills and technology. So, before we get into it,
or lack of technology.
we're drinking for happy hour today Dry Dock beer. I have a pineapple mango blonde.
And I have a cut and run Pilsner, award-winning Pilsner. Not to mention the fact that I do work for Dry Dock, so I felt inclined to have to use Dry Dock for this. I also very much enjoy drinking it, so that helps.
As do I.
Cheers.
Cheers.
Perfect happy hour afternoon.
Absolutely. So we're in Eric's studio, and it's a very inspiring place. We have paintings and paints and pencils and pens and markers and all kinds of good stuff out here for creating artworks. And I was interested on how you've evolved from your artwork back when you started into a more technology-aided kind of process.
I was fortunate enough that when I was going to school for design, was at a time that computers were really becoming a part of it, but still most everything was very hands-on. Working on things like my portfolio and having to photograph my portfolio. Of course, there was no such thing as a digital format at that time, and then having to put things in the slides and crop images so that every image in your portfolio was the same size, things of that nature. Drafting versus using Creative Suite for other options, things
Pen
like
and
that.
ink.
Pen and ink, pencil and paper. Adjusting your kerning by hand versus
Ooh.
by adjusting.
Typography.
It's I say I'm fortunate enough because it helps you kind of understand all the wonderful things that go into the technical side of it. So, as I mentioned, I do work at Dry Dock, so artwork is not a full-time thing at this moment, but there have been times where it is, and I find having that day balance of a structured job to helps me loosen up and get more creative into the art side. So I didn't really start using computers in my artwork or my approach to design or setting up to artwork until I really met you. So getting me my first Mac and
That's right.
working on that was a big step in that direction, and a very frustrating one at the same time. So,
And I should tell our audience that I also went to design school. So I know about Photoshop and how Adobe kind of took hold of that marketplace very shortly after I got into school, or shortly after I graduated probably. But I understand both the tangible and the software side of artwork, and then the technology side. So yes, I did get Eric his very first Mac, and kind of got into that from there. I've always known you as an artist.
Amy was also one of the first people that I know of to refer to me as an artist. I always have done art, from the moment I can remember as a child, in some format or another. My parents were really good about pushing me in that direction and following that passion. My mother being a painter as well. And so outside of my own mother just thinking of me as an artist, I guess when I met Amy was when I was really starting to pursue it myself. And so being called an artist or being told that you're an artist sometimes feels, it's an honor, I guess, but it feels awkward at first. It's almost like looking at yourself in the mirror with a new haircut. Like, you know, it's you and you know, you're talking about me, but, and going back to you setting me up with my first Mac and helping me out with that, it's a huge testament to Amy as a teacher because, you know, when you've learned things one way and now you're trying to create in another format, it can be very frustrating. And I mentioned that, but Amy dealt with that very well and super patient and was able to use her background to help me adapt in that way.
So how would you say that your artwork has changed, or sorry, your process has changed since kind of getting more digital?
So I think I'll take a step back and talk about the types of artwork that I do,
Right.
and then how that relates to everything. So when Amy and I first met, I do a lot of live painting at events, mostly of musicians. You see some musicians in the background here. And so we met at a show that I was painting live at. With that, it's really about living in the moment. It's not as much premeditated, and but it is, you know, there's a little bit of structure involved, but it doesn't relate as much to the computer side. At least not at that point. It didn't. Right. But I'd been doing other forms of art, so I'd already been doing or just started doing chalk art at that time, and then also doing some more portrait work, not quite as loose but a little more tight, from old photographs, things like that. So it came into play a few different ways, learning things from the Creative Suite, whether it's InDesign, which I for some reason really gravitate to. Like there's something that InDesign that makes me feel more comfortable as far as layers and approach to things, but it's probably the clunkiest of the suite.
For designing a raw image kind of thing.
Right, but there's something in the spacing of it that helps me get placement when I do chalk art. So most recently it's doing some chalk menu signs for a shop, a wine shop, and when they send me the dimensions of what's going on and I know I have a wall that I have to hit perfectly, usually the designs that I'm sending them are going to be to spec, and for me, InDesign works really well for that, adding the font use and things like that. And I think this is probably an archaic way of doing it, but what I like the most is the print aspect from it than to be able to tile. So if I can't send a large format to somebody else, I can tile from home at 11 by 8.5 and piece everything together.
Yeah, InDesign is very lightweight for that, for positioning objects and making things the exact scale and size without having 10 million pixels like Photoshop would. So that makes sense that you would use that.
And especially with text and things, like, you know, I know the size of the font that's going to be on there. I know where it's placed on that board, etc. It just makes it a lot easier. Now, this also comes into play with doing chalk art on the ground.
So tell us a little bit about that and how you got started with the chalk art.
So I've been involved with the Denver Chalk Art Festival now. This is going into my 17th year. And the first time I got involved with that, I touched oil pastels before, and then oil pastels on paper. But I'd never really done just chalk pastels on the ground. And I was hanging artwork at a local restaurant and brewery, the Wing Coop, and this was my second showing with them. And the curator at the time called me up and said, "Hey, we're sponsoring a square at this festival, doing chalk art. Can you do chalk art?" And I said, "Yeah, absolutely. I can do chalk art," which was pretty much a lie. I mean, I knew enough about the medium, but I'd never really done it before. And the first year I did it, I was really surrounded by wonderful artists. Every year at that festival, you're surrounded by a bunch of talent, but that really helped kind of really get me a little bit more intrigued with that process and doing it more. And it's, of course, when you love something, it shows and it increases. So it took me to doing chalk art for a number of local businesses, some more commercial sponsors, some film festivals, and even got me a trip to Guam between Christmas and New Year's doing some artwork for Harley Davidson. And a lot of that came into play with how I can lay things out on the computer first. I mean, this goes back to old school sign techniques or painting techniques on larger canvases and setting up an overhead projector. But now I don't have to worry about getting that lined up in the moment on the spot. I can design it ahead of time. If I'm going for an anamorphic design, which is more that three-dimensional side, I can skew things appropriately in Photoshop and draw that out. And then I can drop different filters on it so that I'm really just getting the outlines that I'm looking for, and maybe some of the heavy shadows that I'm looking for on that image. And then I can print in a large format, and there's a couple different ways to use that printing to get the line work onto the sidewalk or on the wall wherever I'm doing the chalk art. One way is to actually just use a cutting wheel, kind of same thing that you'd use for fabric, for leaving holes, perforations within the line work, and then using talcum to brush through it. The other way is there's another artist friend of mine who can project that image or take that larger format, and he burns through the holes. It almost looks like welding, but again, you're pouncing that through. And then you have your outlines and stuff like that exactly where you need them on the ground. And one of the true benefits of that and having it printed and ready to go, it may feel like a little bit of a cheat, but oftentimes at this festival in Denver, it's almost guaranteed that in mid-June here, you're going to get a rainstorm. So your chalk washes away, and then you have your template. You can roll it back down. You can line things back up. It's less of a cheat and more of a savior. You know, I still have to do the artwork. It's just the outline that's there for me. So.
Right. So, wow, yeah, it's a lot more work than some people might imagine to get not only to lay out the chalk work or the design on the ground, but also the anamorphic designs. Sometimes they're skewed. And it's pretty incredible how much skewing has to take place and how different it looks up close versus standing back and looking at it in perspective. So do you think that the technology then has helped you to do those kind of things a lot faster?
Absolutely, a ton faster. I mean, you can do it by hand, just the same way as doing any kind of perspective drawing, and having a slight design background, having to do renderings and things like that. But it's so much easier to stretch it and change it versus having to maybe change a whole drawing or do another layer. Layers on a computer are a lot easier than the old school ways of laying over other pieces of vellum.
Oh man.
So
are there any other tools that you use besides InDesign on your computer, or what about your iPad or your iPhone? Do those come into play?
Oh, absolutely. So nowadays everybody loves to see the process, and I think that's part of the idea that I enjoyed about painting live so much. So going back to that side is you can interact with people while you were doing it, and it kind of takes away some of the mystery of the artwork. And nowadays, being able to film from my phone and do time lapse of pieces, I think is allowing people to have that same feeling of being in the moment. And of course, it's a lot faster when you can do that. I also use my iPad a lot, uh, somewhat just for music and inspiration while I'm painting, but also for detail. So when I talk about doing more portrait work or some other realistic work, right now the piece that's in the background here is a piece that I'm recreating from an old photo from the late 60s. And the photo that I was given to recreate this from, it was a picture of a mural in the background. The mural was in the house that I grew up in. It was a family event that the photo was taken at, and it's the only photo of this mural that exists that we know of right now. And of course, it's older, grainy camera quality, and it's out of focus. So going ahead and scanning that in and then putting it on my iPad so I can zoom in and get some of, it's a fun vignette piece, but at the same time, it allows me to kind of zoom in and get some of that detail that I would never be able to get without a magnifying glass on that old
True.
photo. So,
is there anything else you wanted to share about your process or what you've learned over the years?
I think when it comes to the computer, there's a lot more, and I talked early on about simple ways of even setting up a portfolio. Now it's so easy once you get to know things like Photoshop to say, okay, I want these dimensions, and I'm going to drop a picture in, and I'm going to make sure that all the pieces in my current portfolio are the exact same size or have a black background. No more the days of like sitting there and masking something by hand with silver tape or doing things like that. But again, it helps you kind of understand that process and what you're going for as far as presentation. There's also the idea of like going back to painting live. I've actually been able to, I talked about painting in the moment and stuff, but been able to do a lot more corporate client work when going and painting live. Good example, a couple of winters ago, I did a huge, like not super large painting, but 30 by 40 for engineering firm. And they wanted like 12 of the major structures that they had created across the US featured in one painting. And I had
one skyline,
like a fictional skyline of all their major accomplishments. And I had 2 hours to paint it. Well, I knew I wasn't going to be able to do that. And so same way I would work on a chalk art design, I kind of put together the layout and sent it to them for approval and move this here, do that there. And then I just had all those outlines on my canvas, and I was still able to knock out the whole thing, and they were very pleased with it. And it's also that recognition thing, like when somebody comes over your shoulder and they see you painting something and they're like, that's this. It's like, okay, I nailed it. We're doing all right. Not trying to brag there, but it helps kind of sharpen up those things that you're going for sure.
Thanks for inviting me to your studio and having this conversation.
Thanks for hanging out.
And that's a wrap. Thank you for joining us today. For more about the MacSpa, go to themacspa.com, or for tech tips, go to youtube.com/themacspa. If you have a great idea for a tech topic you'd like to hear about, please leave it in the comments. See you next time.